welcome to the first video of Section 9, Weighted Averages. Weighted averages, we have two different ways that we can solve weighted averages problems. And here you will notice we are on page 73 at the top. So in these two boxes talk about two different methods. And you really can use either method at any point in time. But some of them you'll have to manipulate your values if you want to use a certain method. So we're going to talk about some examples with both of these methods. And if you'll notice, here in method 1, we talk about percents. So the way I kind of look at it, if I'm dealing with a problem that has percentages, I always use method 1 because then I don't have to change anything. And at the bottom, we're using counts. So this one is, if we don't have percentages, we just have a certain number of items, what they're worth, that kind of thing. So we'll talk about different examples of when you would use which one. So we're going to go ahead and go on to page 73. Well, we're still on page 73 at the bottom. So method 1 deals with percent. So you can kind of think about our class, you know, Math 123, and the percentages of the weights that your stuff. You know, we have projects, we have tests, we have the homework, and we have quizzes, and they're all weighted a little bit differently. So basically, it's good to understand what percent each of your grade is made up of what. So like this first question, homework. If we look up here, homework is 15% of your grade. So you may have a ton of homework, but when it comes to the final grade, only 15% of your grade is made up of that. Similarly, your tests up here would be 60%. So that's important information that you're going to need to know to move forward and work on things. So we're going to keep these percentages as we move on to page 74. Now, this first question, number 3, it can be a little bit tricky to think about. So we have our weights. Now, when you're talking about weighted averages, the weights are the only thing that should be written as percents. So the category averages, if you read this problem, your average is 85% on tests, 100% on homework, and 85% on quizzes. So those are the scores that you earned. So when it comes to the category average, think of that as the scores that you earned. So you earned 85 on tests, you earned 100 on homework, and you earned an 85 on quizzes. So because those are the scores I earned, I'm not going to write them as percents, I'm going to write them as scores. Alright, so when I go to find my weight times category average, so in tests I have 60% times 85, and if you remember, I'm going to just write it up on top, well, yeah, up top. 60% is 0.60, and then I have to multiply that by 85. So when I take 0.6 times 85, I have earned 51 points off of tests. So when you go to homework, you would take your 15% times 100. So I've got 15 from that. And when I go to my quizzes, 0.25, 25% times a score of 85 gives me 21.25. So to find my grade, my final grade, I'm going to add up those values that I found in that last column. So if I take 51 plus 15 plus 21.25, I end up with 87.25. So in this class, you have earned a B based on those weights and those category averages. Okay, I want you to hit pause, and then I want you to do number 4. So they've changed your scores, and so hit pause, work your final average, and then come back and check out the answer. So you notice your tests and your homework don't change. So you still got the 51 and the 15 in your last column. But because your quizzes dropped down to 25 average, you earned only 6.25 points for your quizzes. And look how it dropped your grade. It dropped your final grade from an 87 to a 72. So now instead of getting a high B, you're getting a low C just from your quiz problem. So big difference, right? Okay, go ahead and do number 5. So this is a concept that a lot of people think, oh, I'll just do really good on my tests because they're weighted the most, and that'll be great. Well, this person scored an 85 average on all the tests. That's excellent, right? That's a good B. That's very good on tests. But if you don't do any homework or any quizzes, this person fails with a 51. Like, fails big time. So you can't say, well, since tests are worth the most, I'll just do those and won't do anything else. That's not going to cut it. So you want to make sure that you are doing a little bit of everything when it comes to this class. So those are some examples of percentages, and we'll do some more in a bit. But we are now going to move on to page 75 in Method 2. So Method 2, dealing with counts, is probably most famous for GPA calculations. So if you think, we're looking at number 6 here, and we have credit hours. This person is taking history, A&P, a lab, and an IB 101. So we've got the credit hours associated with each class, and we've got the grade that was earned. So you will see above that we have points associated with those grades. So we're going to use those points to fill in the grade number column. So for a C, you earn 2. For an A, you earn 4. A B gives you 3, and an A gives you 4. Because you earned this many points for each credit hour. So when we go to that last column, for history, you had 3 credit hours, and you earned 2 points per credit hour, for a total of, you've earned 6, I call them quality points in my own world. For A&P, it was 4 credits times 4 points, because you got an A, you earned 16 there. See, A's help you a lot. For your lab, worth 2 credits, 3 points per credit, you get 6 there. And IB 101 was a 1 credit hour, you get 4 points for that, and it's a 4. So when you sum up the total number of points you've earned, in this case we have 32. Now your GPA is not 32. Your GPA depends on how many credits you've taken. So you've got to come over here to your credit hours and say, okay, 3 plus 4 plus 2 plus 1. I took 10 credit hours this semester. So when you find your GPA, I take my total points that I've earned, divide it by the credits that I attempted, and I've earned a 3.2 GPA. Okay? So that's kind of how you can use the points. Notice we have no percentages, we just use points. Now in number 7, okay, so number 7 was a create yourself problem, so I've created it for you. You took math, English, communications, and medical terminology. Each one was worth 3 credits, and these are the grades that you earned at the end of the semester. That's not a bad semester at all. I would like you now, using that same method, to calculate your GPA for this grade. So go ahead and hit pause, try it, come back, check out the answer. Alright, so if you fill in your grade number, right, B's are worth 3 points, C's are 2, A's are 4. So when you multiply across credit hours times the number of points you receive per credit, you can find out your total points received. So 9 plus 6 plus 12 plus 9 gives you 36 points. Well, you took 12 credits, right? 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 is 12 credits. So the 36 points I earned divided by my 12 credit hours, your GPA for this semester is a 3. And that is excellent. All right, continuing on. Page 76. Now we're going to use, again, we're using the method 2 because we are not dealing with percentages. So we're going to kind of talk about the different ways, but if we look at this, so we have population, and notice that we have GDP per capita, so it's already figured for us. So the gross domestic product per person in each of these 3 countries. So when we're talking about question 8, how would you calculate the average? Not the weighted average, just the average of the GDP per capita. So remember, the average, we would just add those together and divide. So if I would add all 3 of these numbers together, I get 140,945, and there are 3 countries, so I would divide by 3. The average gross domestic product per capita is 46,981 and 67 cents. Now, that's pretty close to the U.S. GDP, but notice it's really inflated by the high value of Luxembourg. And if you look at the population, LUX doesn't have hardly any people, but China's got a buttload of people, and their GDP is really low. So just finding the basic average does not give us a good representation of the average gross domestic product per capita in terms of these 3 countries. So that's where we have to start thinking about the weights, and that's why weighted average matters. So when we look at this, what country is the largest? Well, hopefully you see easily that's China, and the smallest would be Luxembourg. So therefore, if you go to letter B, which country should be weighted the highest? Well, the most weight should be China because they're the biggest, and the least should be Luxembourg because they're the smallest. And when we think about, well, what are we going to use to figure out the weights? Well, we should use the population Because the population is how we determine the size of these countries, right? We say China's the biggest because it has the most people, and Luxembourg is the smallest because it has the fewest number of people. So when we are moving on to find this, now in number 10, this is a little bit interesting, but think about, okay, so we want to, basically it's the same way as your GPA problem that we just did. So the 54,152 is the U.S., and the U.S. had 318 million people. So if I take each one of those people and multiply by the gross domestic product, we'll get the total gross domestic product. So that's what we're trying to find here in the top is the total GDP. All right, we're kind of working backwards. So China had 1351, and then Luxembourg had 0.522. Well, we would divide by the total population. So we would take the U.S. 318, the Chinese 1351, and the Luxembourg's 522. Okay, so when we do this, go ahead and calculate this. So multiply the top, and then add the bottom. Dividing should be your last step, so go ahead and do that. Alright, so you can see written right here where I just pointed my yellow arrow, those are the numbers in your numerator. If you multiply 318 times 54,152, you get that big number, and I calculate them up separately so you can see. And then here at the bottom, the total numerator is 25,494,104.4 divided by the denominator, which is 1,669.522. So you get an average GDP per capita for 15,270.30 cents. Very different from that average in number 8 of 46,981.67 because we weighted it. We gave China a bigger weight because they had more people. And then you can see the average GDP is a lot closer to the Chinese GDP. And that should make sense. All right, so we've got one more page here. Looking at page 77. We're going to do that same problem, but now we're going to do them as weights. So in case you don't like that other method and you want to do everything method 1 with weights, this is how you can do it. So if you don't want to, you could skip this one. But if I want to say, okay, the U.S., how do we figure out the weight that the U.S. would have? Well, the U.S. has... So the U.S. has 318 million people divided by the total number of people we're dealing with, and that would give us 0.1905, rounded to 4 decimal places. So that would be the weight of the U.S., right? They had 19% of the population. Okay, let's look at China. Okay, so China had 1351 divided by the total. They end up with 0.8092, right? They got 80%, almost 81% of the population that we're dealing with. That's a lot. And then Luxembourg. Luxembourg has a very, very small population, 0.522 divided by the total, and we end up to 4 decimal places at 0.0003. They will make a very small dent in this problem. So there's the weights, and that's how we find them, right? The portion that it is divided by the total. And hey, just a little sideshow here. We're trying to find the percent, right? So you could think of it part to whole, just like we did with proportions the other day. So that would be the U.S. What percent? Now that would give you 19.05 because it's a percent, and you'd have to change it to a decimal. But that's the concept. That's why this works. So if we want to calculate the weighted average for the GDP for these 3 countries using weights, we think about it this way. Okay, so we have, if we create a little table here, we've got weights, and then we've got the GDP. All right, so the U.S., we'll do U.S. in blue. So the U.S. weight is 0.1905, and the GDP was 54152. And then we've got the Chinese, and they're 0.8092 because there's a ton of them, and their GDP was 6093. And then we've got Luxembourg that had a weight of 0.0003. And their GDP was 80,700. So now to think about how do we do this, right? We multiply the weights times the value. So for the U.S., I would take let me change it to blue. 0.1905 times 54,152. Right? We multiply each one. So for the U.S., I would get 10,315.956. I'll round at the end. Always round as late as possible. Chinese, we'll multiply those two numbers and get 4,930.54556. For Luxembourg, I get 24.21. Makes sense. Excuse me. It makes sense that it's so low because their weight is so low. So when you you add those together, you get 15,270.62. That is different by 32 cents from the other method. So it really doesn't matter what method you use, you're going to get essentially the same answer, and that's what we're going for, right? We want the weighted averages to be as exact as possible, and either method is perfect. So it's kind of whatever makes you happy. And I think that is, that's the end of this first video. So go ahead and watch the next video for weighted averages. Thank you.